"Young man, this area is for first-class passengers only." The words dropped like a brick. Zion looked up from his boarding pass. Seat 1A. He hadn't even stepped into the cabin yet. The flight attendant stood tall, polished, and perfectly dismissive. Her eyes swept over his hoodie, his passport, and finally, his skin. She didn't hide the judgment. "I'm supposed to be here," Zion said quietly, showing his ticket. She didn't even look. "Sir, I'll ask you to step aside." Behind him, someone muttered, "What's he doing up here?" Someone else chuckled. Zion felt every eye. He'd spent weeks preparing for his speech at the United Nations Human Rights Forum, but this was a speech he wasn't ready for. The speech of silence, of humiliation swallowed behind the teeth. A second flight attendant appeared. She whispered something. The first nodded and turned back. "I'm sorry," she said, voice tight. "We'll need to re-verify your seat." "Why?" Zion asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. Instead, she gestured for him to exit the cabin. Back on the jet bridge, the air was colder, thinner somehow. Zion stood alone, clutching his backpack like a shield. Through the window, he saw a woman settle into his seat, 1A, legs crossed, glass of champagne in hand. She looked comfortable, like she belonged. He pulled out his phone. There weren't many names in his favorites list, just one that mattered: Dad. It rang once. "Zion!" His throat was tight. They made me leave the plane." Silence. Zion imagined his father behind a desk somewhere, frowning. Then came the answer. Calm, precise. "What's the airline?" "Apex." "Flight number?" 973. Another pause. Then, "Do not move. You're not the one who's leaving. Give me 5 minutes." Zion stared out the window as the jet bridge began to retract. He didn't know how, but something told him the plane wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Zion had never flown first class before. He'd seen it, sure, on YouTube, on travel ads, passing it on the way to coach. But walking into it himself, sitting in 1A, that was different. The leather seat felt like a throne. The air smelled like citrus and warm bread. A flight attendant had even called him Sir during check-in. For a moment, he'd allowed himself to believe he belonged here. This wasn't just a luxury trip. It was a mission. At 16, Zion had been selected to represent Ghana and all of West Africa at the United Nations Youth Human Rights Forum. He was scheduled to deliver a keynote about dignity, education, and access. The invitation had arrived 3 months ago, and his mother cried when she saw it. His teachers framed it. His classmates chanted his name on the last day of school. And his father, well, Solomon Harper didn't cry. He didn't chant. But he flew Zion to Geneva just to have dinner, just to say, "I'm proud of you, son." That's how this flight came about. First class, Zurich to New York. No cost spared. "You don't show up for the world halfway," Solomon had said, pouring Zion a glass of sparkling water. "Not when your name is on the table." Zion remembered that conversation now, standing on the cold jet bridge, heart pounding. He wasn't just some kid in a hoodie. He was his father's son. And Solomon Harper didn't tolerate disrespect. Not in business, not in life, and especially not when it touched his family. Across the globe, in a sleek glass tower in Geneva, Solomon stood by the window, still holding the phone. His jaw had tightened the moment Zion said the words. "They kicked me off the plane." He hadn't asked for details. He didn't need to. Solomon recognized the code when he heard it. Polite prejudice, the kind that smiled while cutting your legs out from under you. He had 5 minutes. 5 minutes to remind Apex Air that some doors don't close unless he lets them. And right now, they'd just slammed one on the wrong kid. Zion didn't cry. He wouldn't give them that. But something inside him cracked as he stood in the terminal, watching other passengers board without a second glance. Not a single person had spoken up. Not the man in the blazer 2 rows behind him. Not the woman with the silk scarf who smiled earlier during boarding. Everyone had just looked away. That's the part that stung most. Not the flight attendant's tone, not the insult, but the silence. It wasn't the first time, of course. Zion had grown used to the microaggressions. The bag searches at airports when no one else was checked. The way people shifted their purses closer when he walked by. The teachers who told him to lower his tone when he wasn't raising it. But this one, being pulled off a plane like he didn't belong in front of diplomats and delegates, cut deeper. He sat on a cold bench near the gate, knees bouncing, trying not to let it all come pouring out. He checked his watch. 3 minutes since the call to his dad. He'd seen what 5 minutes meant in his father's world. When Solomon Harper said 5 minutes, mergers fell apart. Bank wires stopped mid-transfer. CEOs panicked. But still, this was an international flight. Already boarding, already rolling. What could even he do? Zion's mind kept replaying the moment they escorted him off. Like he was a problem, a threat. And the woman who took his seat? She didn't just smirk. She relaxed. Like the flight felt cleaner now. That's what stuck with him. She didn't care if he had a ticket. Didn't care if he was 16. She just didn't want him near her. That was all it took. He opened his bag and pulled out the folded speech he was meant to give at the UN. His fingers gripped the paper tightly. He read the first line aloud, barely a whisper. Dignity is not granted by others. It is claimed by living like you already have it. He exhaled slowly. Then he looked up. The jet bridge had stopped retracting. The plane wasn't moving. And for the first time that morning, Zion let himself believe, maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't over. "Excuse me." The woman's voice pierced the cabin like a fire alarm. Zion looked up from the gate bench, heart lurching. He could see her through the glass. Same white suit, same diamond studs, same tightly managed hair from earlier. She was standing near his seat, flustered and loud. "My wallet is missing," she announced, one hand clutched to her chest, the other patting her designer tote. "It was right here, and now it's gone." Heads turned. Flight attendants exchanged glances. Then she said it. "That boy!" The words echoed like a slap. Zion blinked, stunned. She was pointing. Not at the floor, not at a crew member. Directly through the cabin door glass. At him. "He was standing near me," she said, voice rising. "He kept looking at my bag. I told you something felt off and The flight attendant from earlier, same one who blocked him, now leaned into the doorway, scanning for Zion. Her expression was strained, but not surprised. Zion stood, slow and steady. "You're accusing me of stealing your wallet?" he asked, careful to keep his voice even. "You were the only one close enough to take it," she barked. "You got kicked off for a reason. This proves it." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one spoke. The gate agent looked panicked. "Sir, we may need to check your bag, just to be sure." Zion felt a rush of heat surge up his neck. Not fear, rage. Cold, focused rage. "No," he said flatly. "You don't get to search me because a woman's scared of a black kid in a hoodie." "She's a platinum member," the agent whispered, as if that meant anything. "And I'm Solomon Harper's son," Zion shot back. "You want to call someone? Call security, but you better do it fast." His voice didn't shake, but his hands did, clenched tight at his sides. He looked down the jet bridge toward the plane. The engines were quiet. The jet bridge had stopped moving, and inside that cabin, every passenger was watching now. The boy she thought had no power, he wasn't done yet. The silence after Zion's words was louder than the accusation itself. Even the gate agent stepped back, unsure what to say. There was no script for this moment. No policy manual that covered a 16-year-old black teenager calling out a system stacked against him, without raising his voice. Inside the cabin, the woman in white huffed and folded her arms. "See? Aggressive." That word. It hit harder than thief. Zion didn't flinch. He didn't break eye contact, but the damage was spreading. A ripple of discomfort washed through the boarding area. Passengers who once looked away were now peeking over their seats, sensing something real, something they couldn't unsee. He felt like a case file, a threat assessment. A box checked, make sure he's not hiding anything. And still, he waited. 4 minutes since the call. Back in Geneva, Solomon Harper sat in a soundproof glass office, staring at 2 monitors. One displayed a map of active ESG investments across European airlines. The other was blank, waiting for command input. His assistant hovered nearby. "Mr. Harper, should I—" He raised one finger. 5 minutes, he said. Minute 5. Zion was still standing at the edge of the jet bridge, posture straight, eyes locked on the aircraft that had stripped him of dignity and now wanted to strip him of innocence too. Then, the plane stopped. He didn't hear an announcement. He didn't see a flashing light, but he knew. Something had shifted. The engines died to idle. The jet bridge, which had been detaching, slowly began sliding back into place. Flight 973 wasn't leaving. Not yet. The woman in seat 1C shifted uncomfortably. "What's going on?" The gate agent's radio crackled. She listened, then turned pale. Zion stepped forward. The glass door opened. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. From somewhere inside that plane, someone whispered, "Who is this kid?" And the answer, they were about to find out. In Geneva, Solomon Harper didn't shout. He never had to. While the world believed in loud power, he practiced something quieter, precision. At exactly minute 5, he dialed a number only 5 people in Europe were authorized to use. It rang once. "Mr. Harper," the man on the other end answered, breath catching. "What can I—" "Flight 973, Zurich to JFK, Apex Air. You're going to halt that plane," Solomon said calmly. "Immediately." "Understood. What's the protocol trigger?" "Tier 1 ESG non-compliance, pending emergency audit, effective now." The man didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. Because when Solomon Harper used the phrase Tier 1, it wasn't a warning. It was a system-wide command. Within 30 seconds, 3 things happened. The ESG compliance dashboard for Apex Air dropped to red flag across 17 partner platforms. A freeze order hit $1.2 billion in pending ESG-linked funding. And Zurich Airport's operations board received a live ethics lock alert for Gate D11. Flight 973 was no longer cleared for pushback. Zion didn't know any of that yet, but he felt it. The shift in energy, the sudden urgency on the crew's faces, the buzz in the earpieces, the way the gate agent's eyes widened, then flicked nervously toward him, as if somehow he was part of this decision. He was. Back on the tarmac, a sleek black car rolled onto the restricted runway access lane. A man in a navy coat stepped out, director of ESG Operations Zurich, briefcase in hand, flanked by 2 security officials. He wasn't there for protocol. He was there because Solomon Harper had just triggered a full executive override, the kind used only in cases of ethical violation with global impact. The captain of Flight 973 stood at the galley, staring at the jet bridge. "This can't be happening," he muttered. But it was. Because sometimes, the person you think has no power is the one who controls the system that lets your plane take off. The jet bridge locked back into place with a metallic thud. Passengers inside Flight 973 exchanged confused looks. Some were annoyed. A few sensed something bigger. But the woman in seat 1C, the one who had taken Zion's seat, just sipped her wine. She didn't even glance toward the door. The cabin lights flickered once. Then the announcement came. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a delay. Please remain seated while we await clearance." Clearance. The plane had already been cleared. Until 5 minutes ago. Zion stepped through the glass door, followed by a tall man in a black coat. He wasn't wearing a badge, but his presence felt like authority. Passengers didn't know who he was, but the flight crew did. The purser's smile evaporated. A flight attendant stumbled back, nearly dropping her tray. And the captain? He stepped out of the cockpit, eyes narrowing. "What's going on here?" The man in the coat opened a folder. "My name is Herr Beck, ESG Compliance Oversight. You've been flagged for emergency ethics review, code Tier 1, effective immediately." The captain's jaw clenched. "This is absurd. We followed standard protocol." "No," Herr Beck interrupted. "You followed instinct, the kind that gets people sued." He turned towards Zion. "Mr. Harper, please return to your assigned seat." The entire front row stiffened. Harper. That name meant something, even to those who didn't follow finance. The woman in 1C went pale. The captain swallowed hard. "Sir, we didn't realize." "You didn't ask," Zion said quietly. "You saw a hoodie and made a choice." From the back of the cabin, a woman in business class whispered, "Wait, is that the ESG Harper?" Another passenger Googled it, then gasped. And just like that, the power dynamic shifted. Zion didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The people who dismissed him were now realizing he wasn't just a boy they pushed out of first class. He was the reason their plane hadn't moved an inch. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reinhardt had gone pale. His fingers hovered over the control panel, but he wasn't touching a thing. Not until someone explained why a representative from ESG Compliance Oversight had just walked onto his aircraft without prior notice, and why the jet bridge had reattached mid-pushback. Herr Beck stood calmly in the galley, flipping a tablet open. The screen lit up in his gloved hand. "This is your aircraft's current ethics status within the Ethical Sky Compliance Network," he said, turning the screen toward the purser and captain. "As of 5 minutes ago, Apex Air has been placed on the Tier 1 red list for active ESG violations. Specifically, passenger discrimination, failure to mitigate racial bias, and public humiliation without due process." The captain blinked. "That can't be right." "It's not a suggestion," Beck said. "It's a system-wide lockout." He tapped once. The screen displayed a live dashboard. Bold red text pulsed across the top. "Non-compliant. Ethics lock activated." Underneath, 1.2B ESG funding frozen, 17 global ESG partners alerted slot suspensions pending. Heathrow, Charles de Gaulle, Frankfurt. The purser gasped. "Those are our biggest international hubs." "Not anymore," Beck replied. In seat 1C, Caroline, the woman who accused Zion, sat frozen, wineglass trembling in her hand. She was visibly sweating now, not because she had been wrong, not yet. No, because the ground beneath her status was shifting. And for the first time she realized she was the one under scrutiny now. She leaned forward. "Wait, this is all because of that kid?" Herr Beck didn't even look at her. "This is because someone in your cabin made an accusation, without evidence. And the crew acted on it. That's not protocol. That's bias, and the system recognizes the difference." Back at Gate D11, more figures had arrived. 2 uniformed Zurich airport security officers, 1 Apex Air legal rep, and a woman with a Navy ID badge that simply read, ECJN, European Council for Justice and Neutrality. Zion stood just inside the cabin, watching it all unfold. Not triumphant, not angry, just steady. He didn't speak unless spoken to. That's what his dad had taught him. The woman from ECJN approached him gently. "Zion, would you like to return to your seat now?" He nodded. She walked ahead, clearing the way. And Zion Harper, age 16, walked past every silent mouth that once doubted him. He didn't gloat. He didn't look down. He just walked, quietly, deliberately, back to seat 1A, the seat that always belonged to him. Outside the aircraft, Solomon Harper's face was reflected in a monitor inside ESG Command. He wasn't in Geneva anymore. He was in direct video call with the EU Aviation Ethics Council. "No statement yet," he said coolly. "But once the airline acknowledges fault, the red list flag may be lifted after full compliance training and board-level apology." "And the funding?" someone on the call asked. Solomon looked down for a moment, then said, "That depends on how fast they learn to treat dignity as non-negotiable." He ended the call. Back on board, passengers sat in stunned silence. The woman in 1C was being asked to step off the plane. No one said a word in her defense. The engines stayed off. The message was clear. Power doesn't always come from yelling. Sometimes, it comes from someone who only needs 5 minutes. The cabin door opened again, this time not for Zion. Caroline stood up shakily, her expensive heels suddenly less stable than they looked. A flight attendant stood beside her, no longer smiling, holding out her coat. "You're asking me to leave?" Caroline's voice cracked, clinging to disbelief like it might save her. The purser didn't blink. "Per ESG oversight directive, you are being removed pending investigation for a false accusation." "But I'm a platinum member," she stammered. "I donate to Apex's foundation. I've flown this route for over 15 years. Herr Beck appeared at her side, expression neutral. "And you made a claim without cause that triggered an international ethics breach. Status doesn't protect you from accountability, ma'am. Not anymore." A hush swept through the cabin. Caroline's lips parted as if she might cry, but the tears never came. She grabbed her tote bag and began the slow walk down the aisle, the same walk Zion had made earlier, but now in full view of a different audience. This wasn't quiet humiliation. This was consequence in real time. No one clapped, no one cheered. But there was a quiet justice in the silence. One row back, a young woman in business attire, the same one who had been watching everything, whispered to her seatmate, "You see how quickly it flipped?" The seatmate nodded. That boy never raised his voice, and still, she's the one walking. At the door, Caroline paused and looked back. Zion didn't move. He didn't flinch, and he didn't look away. She left. Next was the flight attendant who first stopped Zion. The station manager stepped on board with a clipboard in hand. "Brenda, you're being relieved of duty for this flight. Report to ESG review desk immediately." Brenda's eyes welled up. "I was following the lead of the passenger." "You made a choice," he said simply, "and now you live with it." The door closed behind them, and in that moment, Flight 973 belonged to someone else. Not to the loudest voice, but to the quietest one that stood its ground. Captain Reinhardt stood in the first-class cabin like a man carrying too much weight. His hat was off. His posture wasn't stiff with command anymore. It was human, uneasy. He looked straight at Zion, who had settled back into seat 1A, posture composed, hands folded. "Mr. Harper," the captain began, his voice low but clear, "I owe you an apology." The cabin quieted again. "I made a call earlier based on assumption," he continued. "I didn't ask the right questions. I didn't follow proper protocol. And more importantly, I didn't treat you with the respect you deserved." Zion didn't say anything. He let the silence do what it needed to do. The captain swallowed hard. "You had every right to that seat, and every right to dignity. What happened before boarding shouldn't have happened, and that's on me." There were no dramatic camera flashes, no applause, just truth, offered plain. And that was enough. Zion nodded once. "Thank you," he said softly, not because it made things right, but because it made things clear. As the captain returned to the cockpit, passengers looked at Zion differently now, not with pity, not with awkwardness, with respect. One older woman in 2D leaned over the aisle and whispered, "Your dad must be proud." Zion offered the smallest smile. "He doesn't do proud," he said. "He does expectations." She chuckled. "Sounds like a good man." In the back of the cabin, a journalist quietly pulled out her notepad. She hadn't intended to write today. She'd just been on her way to cover a human rights panel in New York. But now, she had something bigger, something real. She wrote the title across the top of her notes. "The Flight That Didn't Take Off Until Dignity Boarded." Zion looked out the window as the engines restarted. The runway stretched wide and clear. But this wasn't just about takeoff. This was about the moment the world stopped, looked back, and realized it owed one young man a seat, an apology, and respect. 72 hours later, the story had gone global. Not the tabloid version, not just a blurry clip or a vague social media post. No, this was a documented ethics violation, confirmed by ESG oversight, backed by system logs, board directives, and a very public grounding. The article hit first, the flight that didn't take off until Dignity boarded, published by journalist Eva Moreno, the woman sitting just 3 rows behind Zion. It went viral within 6 hours, picked up by major outlets across Europe and the US. Eva didn't sensationalize it. She told it straight. A black teenager, a first-class seat, an accusation with no evidence, a flight that stopped cold because one father didn't need to yell. He just needed 5 minutes. But what followed went deeper than headlines. In Brussels, the EU Ethics Aviation Council launched an internal audit of Apex Air's passenger protocols, citing a breach of ESG-aligned dignity standards. In Paris, 3 ESG investment groups publicly announced they would withhold $740 million in future funding unless Apex completed a mandatory diversity, ethics, and anti-bias retraining initiative for all crew globally. In New York, the Port Authority held a press conference confirming that the investigation into Flight 973 has led to a wider review of racial bias incidents in transatlantic air travel. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. At Apex's headquarters, the CEO received a blunt memo from Solomon Harper's ESG advisory team. It stated, in clear terms, that no further funding or compliance approval would be granted until Apex signed a binding ethics accord, co-drafted by Harper's office. The message was simple. You are not ESG compliant if you are not humanity compliant. Brenda, the flight attendant who had questioned Zion, was placed on indefinite leave. Her union filed an appeal, but internal records revealed 2 prior complaints of similar behavior that had been overlooked. This time, they couldn't be. Captain Reinhardt kept his job, but under the condition that he complete an intensive 3-month executive ethics recertification and personally address a roundtable of crew leaders about how assumption can become policy, if left unchecked. And the woman in seat 1C? Caroline's name wasn't made public by the airline, but the internet did its job. Within days, she became an unwilling meme. Her charity board quietly removed her. Her luxury design firm's clients pulled out. One even posted, "I'd rather sit and coach with dignity than on her custom sofa." A system had bent to protect people like her. Now, it had bent the other way. And for once, the cost of injustice wasn't just emotional. It was financial, institutional, and global. The second flight to New York was quiet. Different crew, different gate. But the same seat, 1A. Zion sat with his backpack tucked under his legs, his journal in his lap. No one questioned him this time. No one hesitated. The moment he stepped aboard, the gate agent greeted him with a reverent, almost uncomfortable smile. "Welcome, Mr. Harper," she said, as if saying it wrong might trigger a second grounding. He didn't respond with arrogance, just a small nod. He wasn't angry, not anymore. He wasn't proud either. He was changed. The flight was smooth, no announcements, no stares. The new flight attendant offered him sparkling water before takeoff. When she smiled, it was genuine, maybe even a little apologetic, as if carrying the weight of someone else's mistake. Zion opened his journal and flipped to the last page of his speech, the one he never got to deliver at the UN. Dignity is not requested, it is not granted, it is recognized, and when it's denied, it leaves a scar deep enough to echo through systems built to ignore it. He had written that line in Ghana, but now he understood it in a way he didn't back then. When the plane touched down at JFK, a car was waiting. Not blacked out, not dramatic, just sleek, simple, and unmistakably familiar. His father was leaning on the hood, sleeves rolled up, looking more like a tired executive than a storm maker. Zion walked toward him slowly. Solomon didn't speak at first. He just placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Firm, grounding. "You good?" he asked. Zion nodded. "Yeah." They got in the car. Neither said much for a while. Then Solomon spoke. "You didn't ask for anything. You didn't demand anything, and you didn't lose control." Zion looked out the window. "I almost did." His father nodded. "But you didn't. And because of that, the right people fell apart. Not you." Back in Accra, Zion finally delivered his speech. Not to the UN, but to a local auditorium packed with students, teachers, journalists, and one small camera broadcasting live. He didn't talk about ESG. He didn't mention the airline by name. He just told the story of a seat that some thought he didn't deserve, a seat he didn't have to fight for, because someone before him, someone who had fought longer and harder, had already built the floor beneath it. When he finished, the room was silent. Then came the applause. Not wild, not noisy, respectful, earned, deep, just like the seat. And this time, it would stay his. What did you think of this story? Have you ever witnessed or lived through a moment where silence spoke louder than any argument? Tell us where you're watching from, and if Zion's story moved you, share this video with someone who needs to remember. Dignity doesn't need permission. And justice, sometimes, it just takes one person standing still. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Telltales, and hit the bell so you won't miss more powerful stories like this one. We tell these stories to remind you, real power doesn't need to shout.